I found my deceased brother's fingerprints at a crime scene last week. He died in 2019. The fingerprint scanner beeped 3 times. Match found. I stared at the screen in the mobile forensics van, parked outside a ransacked jewelry store in downtown Minneapolis, watching the database cycle through its identification protocol. The system pulled up a name, a photo, a date of birth, and a notation I'd seen maybe twice in my 8-year career as a forensic technician. Deceased, 2019. The name on the screen was Ethan Graves, my brother, my dead brother. The brother I'd helped bury 5 years ago after his car went off a bridge into the Mississippi River during a winter storm. The brother whose closed casket funeral I'd sat through in a suit I'd bought specifically for the occasion because I'd outgrown my only other one. The brother whose death had shattered our mother so completely that she'd aged 10 years in 6 months. I sat frozen in the van, the laptop's glow turning my face blue in the darkness. My partner, Kevin Ostrowski, a 43-year-old veteran of the Minneapolis PD with 20 years on the force and a perpetual coffee stain on his shirt, was outside photographing the broken display cases. The robbery had happened at 2:17 a.m., according to the alarm system, just 3 hours ago. Security footage showed a figure in black tactical gear and a ski mask, methodical and professional, bypassing the alarm with practiced ease. They'd taken approximately $340,000 in diamonds and custom pieces, mostly high-end engagement rings and estate jewelry. Clean, fast. No DNA left behind except for a single partial fingerprint on the edge of a display case that the perpetrator had apparently leaned against while working. One print. That's all it took. I'd been working crime scenes in Minneapolis for almost a decade, ever since graduating from the University of Minnesota with a degree in forensic science. Started as an evidence technician, worked my way up to senior forensic specialist, processed hundreds of scenes ranging from burglaries to homicides. I knew contamination protocols, chain of custody procedures, proper evidence handling. I knew that fingerprint databases weren't infallible, that sometimes there were clerical errors or data corruption. I knew all of this intellectually, but staring at my brother's photo on that screen, I felt my hands start to shake. The photo was from his driver's license, taken when he was 28, 2 years before he supposedly died. Same dark hair, same crooked smile, same scar above his left eyebrow from when he'd fallen off his bike at age 12. Ethan Michael Graves, D.O.B., March 15, 1988. Deceased, November 3, 2019. I screenshotted the match, sent it to my personal email, then sat there trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Database error. Had to be. Someone else's prints misfiled under Ethan's name. Except I'd personally submitted Ethan's fingerprints to the database myself after his death. Standard procedure for closing out his identification in the system. I'd held his police clearance card from when he'd worked as a security guard in 2016, scanned those prints into our system to ensure his records were complete. I knew they were accurate. I knew the system worked. I knew my brother was dead. The medical examiner had identified his body. We'd had a funeral. There was a death certificate. And yet here were his fingerprints, fresh as yesterday's crime scene, lifted from a jewelry store robbery that happened while I was asleep in my apartment 6 miles away. Kevin knocked on the van's door, startling me. I quickly closed the laptop screen. "We're wrapped out here," he called through the metal. "Got everything photographed and logged. You get anything useful from those prints?" I opened the door, stepping out into the cold October air, my breath misting in front of my face. It was 5:43 a.m., still dark, the street lit by the harsh LED lights we'd set up around the crime scene. "Partial match," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Might be nothing. I'll run it through the extended database when we get back." Kevin nodded, already moving toward his car. "Breakfast at Murray's? I'm buying if you're writing up the preliminary report." I agreed automatically, my mind elsewhere, watching the crime scene tape flutter in the wind while my dead brother's fingerprints sat in my email inbox like a grenade with the pin pulled. I didn't go to breakfast. Told Kevin I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't entirely a lie. My stomach was churning as I drove straight home to my apartment in Uptown, a 1-bedroom place I'd rented for 6 years, decorated with the bare minimum because I spent most of my time working. I lived alone after my divorce in 2021, no pets, no plants, nothing that required care or attention beyond myself. It was 6:15 a.m. when I pulled up the screenshot on my laptop, staring at it for the 100th time. The fingerprint match was classified as 18 points of comparison, which was well above the 12-point minimum required for a positive identification in Minnesota. This wasn't a partial match or a maybe. This was definitive. This was my brother's right index finger, pressed against a display case at 2:17 a.m. on October 11, 2024, 5 years after his alleged death. I pulled out the box I kept in my closet, the one labeled Ethan, Personal Effects. Our mother, Linda Graves, had given it to me after the funeral because she couldn't bear to look at it. Inside were his wallet, his phone, his apartment keys, his watch, and a manila folder containing all the official documentation of his death. I spread the papers across my kitchen table like I was conducting an investigation, because that's essentially what I was doing. Death certificate signed by Dr. Raymond Kellerman, Chief Medical Examiner for Hennepin County, 32 years of experience. Cause of death, drowning, manner of death, accident. The report noted that Ethan's 2004 Subaru Outback had been found in the Mississippi River near the Plymouth Avenue Bridge, driver's side door open, airbag deployed. Ethan's body had been recovered 3 days later, downstream near Boom Island. The autopsy report described moderate decomposition consistent with submersion, positive identification made through dental records because facial features were compromised. I'd never actually seen the body. None of us had. The medical examiner recommended against viewing due to the condition of the remains. I called my mother at 7 a.m., knowing she'd be awake. She was an early riser, always had been, usually up by 5 to drink coffee and read the newspaper on her tablet. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and clear. "Michael, honey, this is early for you. Everything okay?" I hesitated, phone pressed against my ear, staring at the death certificate. "Mom, I need to ask you something about Ethan." The pause on the other end was heavy. We didn't talk about Ethan much anymore. It had been 5 years, and while the grief had dulled to a manageable ache, bringing him up still hurt. "What about him?" she asked carefully. I thought about how to phrase this, how to explain that I'd found her dead son's fingerprints at a crime scene without sounding insane. "Did you ever have any doubts? About the accident? About the identification?" Another pause, longer this time. "Why are you asking this?" Her voice had changed, gone cautious and tight. "Just answer the question, Mom. Did you?" She was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, softly, "I never saw his face. They said it was too damaged. They identified him through dental records. I always wondered if they got it wrong, if maybe he was still out there somewhere. But that's just grief talking, Michael. That's just a mother not wanting to believe her son is gone." I hung up after promising to visit her that weekend, then sat staring at the autopsy report. Dental records. I pulled out my phone and called Dr. Kellerman's office, reaching an answering service that told me he'd retired in 2022. They gave me the number for his replacement, Dr. Monica Shields, but I didn't want to talk to someone who hadn't handled Ethan's case. I needed Dr. Kellerman. I spent the next hour tracking him down through public records, finally finding a landline number for a Raymond Kellerman in Edina. I called at 8:30 a.m., and a woman answered. "Kellerman residence." I explained who I was, that I needed to speak with Dr. Kellerman about a case from 2019. She told me to hold, and a minute later a man's voice came on the line. "This is Ray Kellerman." I identified myself as Michael Graves, brother of Ethan Graves, case number ME 2019-1847. There was a pause. "I remember that case," he said slowly. "Winter drowning. What's this about?" I explained that I was a forensic technician, that I'd encountered something unusual, that I needed to verify the identification procedures used. "Mr. Graves," he said carefully, "I'm retired. You should speak with my successor about case files." I pressed harder. "Did you personally examine my brother's body?" Another pause. "I supervised the examination, yes." "Did you personally compare the dental records?" Silence stretched. Then, "Mr. Graves, what exactly are you asking?" I met Dr. Kellerman at a Caribou Coffee in Edina at 10 a.m. He was 71 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of steady hands and sharp eyes that came from decades of working with the dead. We sat in a corner booth away from other customers, and I showed him the fingerprint match on my laptop. He studied it for a long time, his expression unreadable. "Where did you get this?" he asked finally. I explained the crime scene, the partial print, the database match. He sat back, folding his hands on the table. "Mr. Graves, I need to tell you something that's going to be difficult to hear. When your brother's body was recovered, it had been in the water for 3 days in November. The cold preserved it to some degree, but there was significant damage from trauma and aquatic exposure. The face was not recognizable. We made the identification based on dental records provided by his dentist, Dr. Arthur Pembroke. The records matched. We had no reason to doubt the identification." I felt my chest tighten. "But you didn't actually see his face. You couldn't visually confirm it was him." Dr. Kellerman shook his head. "Visual identification wasn't possible. That's why we used dental records. They're considered definitive." I leaned forward. What if the dental records were wrong? What if they were switched or falsified? He looked uncomfortable. That would be highly irregular. Dental records come directly from the dentist's office. There would have to be deliberate fraud. We stared at each other. "I think you need to look into that possibility," I said quietly. I drove to Dr. Pembroke's office in St. Paul that afternoon, a small dental practice in a strip mall near Grand Avenue. The receptionist told me Dr. Pembroke had retired in 2020 and sold the practice to Dr. Lisa Cho. I asked for Dr. Cho, explaining that I needed to verify some old records. She came out to the waiting room, a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. I showed her my credentials, explained the situation in vague terms, said I needed to verify dental records from 2019. She took me back to her office and pulled up the digital files. "What's the patient name?" she asked. "Ethan Graves. Date of birth March 15, 1988. She typed, waited, frowned. "I'm not showing anyone by that name in our system. Are you sure he was a patient here?" My hands went cold. "He should be. These records were used to identify a body in November 2019. Dr. Cho searched again, trying different spellings, different dates of birth. Nothing. "I'm sorry," she said. If he was Dr. Pembroke's patient, his records should have transferred when I bought the practice. I have complete files going back to 2008. There's no Ethan Graves. I asked if there was any way records could have been deleted or lost. She said it was possible but unlikely, that the digital backups were comprehensive. I asked for Dr. Pembroke's contact information. She hesitated, then gave me his phone number. I called Dr. Pembroke from my car in the parking lot. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding elderly and confused. I explained who I was, what I needed. Ethan Graves? He repeated slowly. I don't recall that name. When did you say he was my patient? I gave him the dates, explained about the identification. There was a long silence. Son, I'm 78 years old, and I've had thousands of patients. I can't remember everyone. But if the records were used for identification, they would have come from my office. You'd need to check with Dr. Cho. I told him Dr. Cho had no records. Another silence. That's odd, he said finally. Very odd indeed. I asked if there was any way someone could have obtained false dental records from his office. He sounded offended. My office had strict protocols. We didn't just hand out records to anyone. I thanked him and hung up, sitting in my car as the implications settled over me like a shroud. If Ethan's dental records didn't exist, then the body we'd buried wasn't Ethan, which meant either someone had deliberately provided false records to the medical examiner, or Ethan himself had staged his own death. I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could find about Ethan's life before his supposed death. Bank records showed his accounts were closed in December 2019, a month after he died. His apartment lease had been terminated, his belongings put in storage, and eventually disposed of when no one claimed them. His phone had been recovered from the car, water damaged beyond repair. His employer, a security company called Sentinel Protection Services, had received notification of his death and processed his final paycheck to our mother as his beneficiary. Everything looked legitimate on the surface, the kind of routine administrative cleanup that happens when someone dies. But now I was looking for cracks, for inconsistencies, for signs that this had all been orchestrated. I found the first crack in his employment records. Ethan had worked for Sentinel Protection Services for 3 years, from 2016 to 2019, doing overnight security at various warehouses and commercial properties. I called the company, asked to speak with someone who'd worked with him. They connected me with Gerald Novak, a supervisor who'd been there for 15 years. Ethan was a good worker, Gerald said. Reliable, professional. It was shocking when we heard he'd died. I asked if Ethan had seemed troubled before his death, if there'd been any signs. Gerald hesitated. Now that you mention it, he did request a leave of absence in October 2019, about 3 weeks before the accident. Said he had some personal matters to handle. We approved it, but he never came back. That leave of absence was new information. I checked Ethan's bank records again, the ones I'd obtained as executor of his estate. In October 2019, there were 3 large cash withdrawals, $3,000 on October 8th, $5,000 on October 15th, and $4,200 on October 28th. Total, $12,200 in cash, withdrawn over 3 weeks. Then, on November 1st, 2 days before his supposed death, one final withdrawal, $8,800. The account was emptied. I'd noticed this at the time, but assumed he'd been paying debts or had some financial emergency. Now it looked like someone systematically draining their accounts before disappearing. I pulled phone records next, the ones the police had obtained during their investigation into the accident. Ethan's phone showed normal activity until November 2nd, then nothing. The last call was to a pizza place. The last text was to a friend about watching a football game. Completely mundane. Then silence. His phone had been found in the submerged car, the screen shattered, the internal components destroyed by water. But what if that phone had been planted? What if Ethan had bought a burner phone, made those last few calls and texts from his real phone to establish a timeline, then tossed it in the car before sending the vehicle into the river? I contacted Detective Lawrence Park, the Minneapolis PD investigator who'd handled Ethan's case, now retired and living in Arizona. I reached him on his cell phone while he was playing golf. Ethan Graves, he said, his voice crackling over a bad connection. Yeah, I remember that one. Accidental drowning, winter 2019. Sad case. Why are you asking? I explained I was Ethan's brother, that some questions had come up. What kind of questions? I told him about the missing dental records, the cash withdrawals, the leave of absence. Detective Park was quiet for a moment. Look, I worked that case thoroughly. The car went into the river during a storm. Witnesses saw it happen. The body was recovered and identified through proper channels. It was ruled an accident. Are you suggesting it wasn't? I hedged. I'm suggesting the identification might not have been as definitive as everyone thought. Another pause. You got new evidence? I thought about the fingerprint match sitting in my email. Maybe. Still investigating. He gave me his email address, told me to send whatever I found, said he'd take a look even though he was retired. But kid, he added, sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. Your brother drove off a bridge in a storm. It happens. Except it didn't happen. I knew that now with increasing certainty. I went back to the crime scene photos from the jewelry store robbery, examining every detail. The perpetrator had moved with practiced efficiency, bypassing a sophisticated alarm system that most criminals couldn't crack. They'd known exactly which cases held the most valuable pieces, ignoring costume jewelry and focusing on high-end items. The whole operation had taken less than 9 minutes according to the timestamps. Professional, experienced. I started searching for similar robberies in the Minneapolis area over the past 5 years, using the police database I had access to through my job. I found 6 jewelry store hits with the same MO: late night, professional execution, alarm bypass, high-value targets, minimal evidence left behind. The earliest was in March 2020, 4 months after Ethan's supposed death. All unsolved. I cross-referenced the dates with major events, looking for patterns. Every robbery had occurred during a weekend when there was a major sporting event or concert, something that would keep police resources stretched thin and response times slower. I was breaking protocol by investigating this on my own. Technically, I should have reported the fingerprint match immediately, kicked it up to homicide or robbery, let them handle it. But how could I explain that my dead brother was apparently alive and committing felonies without sounding either crazy or complicit? I needed more proof, something undeniable that would force the department to take this seriously. I spent the weekend staking out pawn shops, showing Ethan's photo to clerks, asking if anyone had seen him trying to sell jewelry. Nothing. I checked with known fences in the area, people I'd encountered through my work, carefully asking if anyone had heard about a new player moving high-end merchandise. One guy, a pawnbroker named Donnie Roth, who'd been arrested 3 times for receiving stolen property, gave me a lead. "There's this guy," he said, scratching his beard. "Comes around every few months with estate jewelry, loose diamonds, pays cash, doesn't ask questions. Real professional. I never dealt with him personally, but I heard he works through a broker on the east side." He gave me a name: Felix Moreno, an import-export dealer who allegedly moved stolen goods through his legitimate business. I found Felix Moreno's warehouse on Monday morning, a nondescript building in an industrial area near the airport. The sign outside said, "Moreno International Trade." I parked across the street and watched the place for 3 hours, seeing delivery trucks come and go, workers loading and unloading containers. At 11:30 a.m., a black Audi pulled up and a man got out. Dark hair, average height, wearing sunglasses and a leather jacket. My heart stopped. Even from a distance, even after 5 years, I recognized the way he moved, the set of his shoulders. Ethan. My dead brother, walking into a warehouse like he owned the place. I sat frozen in my car, watching him disappear inside. He emerged 20 minutes later carrying a briefcase, got back in the Audi, and drove away. I followed, keeping 3 cars back, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. He drove to a high-rise apartment building in downtown Minneapolis, parked in the underground garage, and went inside. I waited until he was out of sight, then approached the building directory. Apartment 2408 was listed under the name Eric Grayson. Eric Grayson, e.g. Ethan Graves. He wasn't even trying that hard to hide. I called Kevin Ostrowski, my partner, from my car. "I need a favor," I said. "Off the books." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "What kind of favor?" I asked him to run the name Eric Grayson through the DMV database, get me an address, a photo, anything he could find. "Mike, what's this about?" I couldn't tell him the truth. "Possible witness in an old case. I'll explain later." He agreed reluctantly, said he'd have something by end of day. The information came through at 6 p.m. Eric Grayson, born March 15, 1988, same birthday as Ethan. Address, 2408 Lakeview Apartments, downtown Minneapolis. Driver's license photo showed a man with dark hair and a beard, but the eyes were unmistakable. Ethan's eyes. Kevin had added a note. "This guy has a clean record, not even a parking ticket. Why are we interested?" I didn't respond. I was too busy staring at my brother's face, alive and well, living under a fake name in a luxury apartment while our mother mourned him every single day. I broke into Eric Grayson's apartment on Wednesday night at 2 a.m. I knew it was illegal. I knew it could cost me my job and potentially get me arrested. I didn't care. I used techniques I'd learned from crime scenes, bypassing the lock on his apartment door with tools I'd acquired over the years. The place was upscale, modern furniture, expensive electronics, artwork on the walls. In the bedroom, I found a walk-in closet filled with designer clothes, shoes, watches. On the dresser, a collection of IDs. Eric Grayson, Edward Graham, Elliot Grant, all with Ethan's photo, different names. In a locked drawer, easy to pick with a paperclip, I found documentation from multiple bank accounts, property deeds, business registrations. My brother had built an entire identity empire. In another drawer, I found something that made my blood run cold. Photographs. Surveillance photos of jewelry stores, shopping centers, high-end retail locations. Notes about security systems, guard schedules, alarm protocols. This wasn't just theft. This was organized, professional, ongoing criminal enterprise. I photographed everything with my phone, careful not to disturb anything, leaving no trace I'd been there. In the kitchen, I found a laptop, password protected. I didn't have the skills to crack it, but I knew someone who did. I called my friend Rachel Kim, a digital forensics specialist, who worked for the FBI field office in Minneapolis. We'd met at a conference 3 years ago and had stayed in touch. I asked if she could crack a laptop without the owner knowing. "Mike, what the hell are you involved in?" she asked. I told her I'd found evidence of a major theft ring, that I needed to access files without tipping off the subject. She agreed to meet me at her office downtown. I brought the laptop, watched her work her magic, bypassing the password using some kind of bootable USB drive and forensic software I didn't understand. Within an hour, she had full access. "You've got 30 minutes before I have to log this," she said. "After that, this becomes official FBI business." I nodded, started searching through files. What I found was 5 years of meticulous criminal activity. Spreadsheets tracking robberies, sales, profits. Documents showing how he laundered money through legitimate businesses. A digital diary of sorts, detailing how he'd planned his own death, paid someone to provide false dental records, staged the car accident, and started his new life. The diary was the smoking gun. Ethan had written it like a manual, a how-to guide for faking your death and starting over. He'd been planning it for months, researching methods, finding corrupt officials who would provide fake documentation for the right price. The dental records had cost him $15,000, paid to a dental assistant who'd since left Dr. Pembroke's office and moved to Florida. The body in the river had been a homeless man Ethan had found frozen to death under a bridge, a John Doe whose disappearance would never be investigated. Ethan had dressed the body in his clothes, put his phone and wallet in the car, and sent it into the river during a storm when visibility was poor and witnesses would be scarce. He'd watched from a distance, verified the police response, then disappeared into his new identity. The diary entries were clinical, detached, showing no remorse for what he'd put our mother through, no acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. In one entry from December 2019, he wrote, "Mom will grieve, but she'll recover. Better she thinks I'm dead than knows I'm a criminal. This way, she keeps her dignity, and I keep my freedom." I copied everything to a secure drive, then let Rachel take over. She read through the files, her expression growing harder with each page. "Mike, this is massive. We're talking multiple felonies, fraud, theft, possibly murder if he killed that homeless man. This needs to go to the bureau immediately." I nodded, numb. "What about me?" I broke into his apartment. Rachel looked at me seriously. "You're a forensic technician who discovered evidence of a major crime. The how you discovered it can be addressed later, but right now, we have a dead man committing robberies and a 5-year cover-up involving multiple officials. That's the priority." She made some calls, and within 2 hours, the apartment building was surrounded by FBI agents. I watched from Rachel's office as they raided apartment 2408, extracting Ethan in handcuffs at 4:30 a.m. He looked shocked, confused, scanning the crowd as they led him to a waiting vehicle. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance. His expression shifted from confusion to recognition to fury. He mouthed something I couldn't make out. Then he was gone, loaded into the vehicle and driven away. The interrogation lasted 18 hours. I wasn't allowed to watch, but Rachel kept me updated. Ethan had initially denied everything, claimed he was Eric Grayson, that this was a case of mistaken identity. Then they showed him the fingerprint match from the jewelry store, showed him the files from his laptop, showed him the photos of the surveillance work, the spreadsheets, the diary. He'd finally broken around hour 12, admitting to everything but maintaining he'd acted alone, that no one else knew. They asked about the dental records, the corrupt official who'd helped him. He gave them a name, Donna Fletcher, former dental assistant at Dr. Pembroke's office, now living in Tampa. The FBI in Florida picked her up within hours. They asked about the body in the river. Ethan admitted he'd found a deceased homeless man, had taken advantage of the circumstances, insisted he hadn't caused the death. The medical examiner would have to verify that, but preliminary evidence suggested Ethan was telling the truth about finding an already dead body. Small comfort. The media coverage was instantaneous and overwhelming. Man fakes death, lives as jewelry thief for 5 years, dominated every news outlet in Minnesota. Our mother's address was published by some overzealous reporter, and she was besieged by camera crews and journalists asking for statements. I drove to her house in Bloomington, found her sitting in her living room in shock, staring at the television where Ethan's mugshot was being displayed alongside old photos from before his death. She looked at me when I walked in, her eyes red and swollen. "I knew," she whispered. "Some part of me always knew he wasn't really gone. But I thought it meant he was out there somewhere, happy, maybe in witness protection or starting over. I never thought—" She couldn't finish. I sat beside her, put my arm around her shoulders, and we watched the news coverage together in silence. The reporter was detailing the 6 robberies Ethan had committed, the estimated $2.1 million in stolen merchandise, the elaborate fake identity network. They interviewed Dr. Kellerman, who admitted the identification process had relied solely on dental records that were now suspected to be fraudulent. They interviewed Detective Park, who said the original investigation had been thorough, but that new evidence had come to light. They interviewed the jewelry store owner whose business had been robbed last week, who said he was relieved an arrest had been made, but that most of his merchandise was still missing. The charges came down like a hammer. Federal grand jury indicted Ethan on 43 counts: fraud, identity theft, interstate commerce of stolen property, conspiracy, falsifying official documents, and a dozen other charges I couldn't keep straight. The state of Minnesota added more: grand theft, burglary, breaking and entering, criminal damage to property. His bail was set at $5 million, which he couldn't make. He sat in Hennepin County Jail awaiting trial while prosecutors built their case. I visited him once, 2 weeks after his arrest, at the county lockup. We sat across from each other in a visitation room, separated by plexiglass, communicating through phones mounted on the wall. He looked thinner, older, his beard shaved, his hair cut short by prison barbers. "Why'd you do it?" I asked. No preamble, no greeting. He smiled, that same crooked smile I remembered from childhood. "Why does anyone do anything, Mike? Money, freedom, the chance to be someone else." I felt anger rising in my chest. "You destroyed Mom. She grieved for you for 5 years. We had a funeral. We buried someone we thought was you." Ethan shrugged. "She'll get over it. She's tough." I wanted to reach through the glass and strangle him. "You're a sociopath." He laughed. "Probably, but I'm a rich sociopath. Or I was, until you ruined everything." I asked him about the fingerprint, why he'd been careless. He looked frustrated. "I wasn't careless. I wore gloves the entire time. Perfect execution. But the last case, the one with the custom pieces, I had to lift it slightly to access the lock underneath. Must have brushed against it when I adjusted my position. 1 second of contact, 1 partial print. That's all it took." He shook his head. 5 years of perfect jobs, and I get caught because of a split-second mistake. I asked if he felt any remorse, any guilt for what he'd put us through. He thought about it, actually seemed to consider the question. "Honestly, no. I feel bad it ended this way, bad I got caught. But the years I had, living as Eric Grayson, those were the best years of my life. I was free, Mike. Free from expectations, from responsibilities, from being Ethan Graves, the screw-up security guard nobody respected. I was someone else, someone successful and powerful, and it was fucking glorious." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye, walked out of that visitation room, and never went back. He called me 6 times over the next month. I never answered. He wrote letters. I burned them unopened. Whatever connection we'd had as brothers had died the night he drove that car into the river with a stranger's body inside. The trial lasted 3 months. The prosecution called 90 witnesses, presented thousands of pages of evidence, showed the jury the diary Ethan had written detailing his entire scheme. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity, claimed Ethan had suffered a mental breakdown before faking his death, that his actions were the result of untreated psychological trauma from childhood. The prosecutor destroyed that argument by showing the meticulous planning, the years of successful criminal activity, the clear and calculated nature of every decision Ethan had made. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all 43 federal counts. The state trial followed immediately after, another conviction on all counts. Sentencing came in August 2025. The federal judge gave him 35 years without possibility of parole. The state judge added another 20 years, to run consecutively. Ethan would be 88 years old before he was eligible for release. He would die in prison, which seemed appropriate given that he'd already died once before. The aftermath was complicated. Our mother never recovered from the revelation, dying of a stroke in January 2026, 3 months after Ethan's sentencing. The doctors said it was natural causes, that she'd had underlying heart conditions, but I knew the truth. The stress of discovering her dead son was alive, and a criminal had killed her. I arranged her funeral, buried her next to the empty grave that supposedly held Ethan's remains. We had the grave exhumed, did DNA testing on the body inside. It was indeed a homeless man, a 41-year-old drifter named Timothy Larson, who'd frozen to death under the Plymouth Avenue Bridge in October 2019. We gave him a proper burial, tried to locate his family, but found no one. Another victim of Ethan's selfishness. The dental assistant, Donna Fletcher, got 12 years in federal prison for her role in the fraud. The investigation revealed she'd helped fake deaths for at least 4 other people over the years, part of a larger underground network selling false identification and death certificates to people wanting to disappear. I quit my job as a forensic technician 6 months after the trial. Couldn't stomach processing crime scenes anymore, knowing how easily evidence could be manipulated or faked. I went back to school, got a degree in counseling, started working with families who'd lost loved ones to violence or deception. Turned my trauma into purpose, helped others navigate the complicated grief that comes when someone you trusted betrays you fundamentally. I never married again, never had kids, poured all my energy into my work and into keeping my mother's memory alive in ways that honored her, not him. I started a foundation in her name, Linda Graves Memorial Fund, providing support for families dealing with missing persons cases and complicated grief situations. We've helped thousands of people over the past few years, giving them resources and community when the systems failed them. I still think about that moment in the forensics van sometimes, staring at the screen showing my dead brother's fingerprints at a fresh crime scene. The cognitive dissonance of knowing something is impossible, but seeing proof it happened anyway. It changed how I see the world, made me question everything, trust nothing at face value. But it also taught me that truth has a way of surfacing eventually, that lies require constant maintenance, while truth just sits there waiting to be discovered. Ethan thought he could outrun his identity, could become someone else and leave his old life behind like changing clothes. But you can't escape yourself. You can change your name, your location, your entire history, but you're still you underneath it all. And eventually, some small mistake, one partial fingerprint on a jewelry case, brings everything crashing down. The FBI recovered about $890,000 of the stolen merchandise and cash from Ethan's various accounts and safe deposit boxes. The rest was gone, presumably sold or hidden so well they'll never find it. The jewelry store owners got some restitution, though not nearly enough to cover their losses. The insurance companies paid out claims, raised premiums, installed better security systems. Life went on, as it always does, with or without justice. I got a letter from Ethan last month, his first communication in 2 years. It was waiting in my mailbox when I got home from work, his handwriting instantly recognizable on the envelope. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. Inside was a single page, written in the careful script I remembered from his childhood. Mike, I know you won't forgive me. I don't expect you to. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry Mom died thinking I was a monster. I'm sorry I put you in the position of having to expose me, and I'm sorry I wasn't the brother you deserved. I made my choices knowing the consequences, and I'm living with them now. I hope you found peace with all this. I hope you're doing better than I am. Take care of yourself. E. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away with all the other evidence from the case. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say to him, no words that could bridge the gap between who he'd been and who he'd become. Sometimes people ask me if I ever wonder what made Ethan do it, what drove him to such elaborate deception and cruelty. The truth is, I stopped wondering. Some people are wired differently, see the world through a lens that prioritizes their own desires over everything else. Ethan was one of those people, and no amount of analysis or psychological profiling would change that fundamental truth. He chose himself over everyone else, and that choice defined his entire life and eventual downfall. I've made peace with it in the way you make peace with natural disasters or terminal illnesses, accepting that some things happen regardless of whether they're fair or make sense, and that the only choice you have is how you respond. 5 years ago, I found my deceased brother's fingerprints at a crime scene. Today, I'm sitting in my office at the counseling center, helping a woman whose husband faked his suicide and disappeared with their life savings. I'm listening to her tell her story, watching her process the betrayal, and I'm thinking about how trauma creates ripples that extend far beyond the initial impact. Ethan's actions didn't just affect him or me or our mother. They touched everyone involved in his cases: the store owners, the insurance companies, the police who spent years investigating, the families of the other people who'd purchased fake deaths from the same network. His choices created a web of consequences that's still unfolding, still affecting lives in ways he probably never considered or cared about. But out of that wreckage came something else: awareness, vigilance, systemic changes to how deaths are verified and investigated. The medical examiner's office now requires multiple forms of identification before declaring someone deceased, cross-references dental records with multiple databases, photographs and fingerprints every body. The system got stronger because it failed, learned because it was fooled. I'm not grateful for what Ethan did. I'm not one of those people who finds silver linings in tragedy or claims that suffering made me better. But I have learned to live with it, to carry the knowledge of his betrayal without letting it crush me. I've learned that family is defined by choices, not blood, and that sometimes the people you're related to are strangers wearing familiar faces. I've learned that grief is complicated, that you can mourn someone who never really died, that loss takes many forms and none of them are simple. And I've learned that the truth, however painful, is always better than living with a lie. Even when that truth means accepting that your brother is a sociopath who faked his death and let your mother grieve him while he lived in luxury off the proceeds of his crimes. Even when that truth means everything you thought you knew about someone was carefully constructed fiction. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.